Hi everyone, welcome back to the Velvet Lounge, and we are going to discuss button backs today. There are a lot of different button backs, so I am going to discuss some of them, and perhaps I'll do a second video that will show even more. The back of the button is just as important when you are categorizing, valuing, collecting, or describing a button. So sometimes it's really obvious, so people do not put the information in the description. But in some cases, if your button has history, if it's, unique or rare or made of a precious, semi-precious or precious material, or maybe someone famous had it on their uniform, whatever, you would want to put the information about the back in your description. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We have a lot of videos in regards to information when you're valuing your antiques, unique and collectible, and sometimes everyday items. In our videos that describe what we sold on eBay or elsewhere. And you can use that information even if you are not a reseller, if you just want to know the value of your items before you give them over to someone else to sell, before you have a tag sale, etc. That information also comes in handy that way. But if you are a reseller, in any of the different ways that you could resell out on the market, whether it be Craigslist, a tag sale, eBay, Amazon, Etsy, whatever it is, we have a lot of information out there as to tips, tricks, how to source, what you should pay, what you should be aware of, anything that will make the whole process easier, quicker, streamlined. So please check out our other videos and take a moment to subscribe to our channel. And please give us a thumbs up on any video that you watch. If you don't like it, give us a thumbs down. Let us know why in the comments. What we can do, we are a very organic channel, so we will not have a bunch of production behind any video, and we apologize for that if that's what you're looking for, but we're the real deal Holyfield, if you will, and we just want to get the information out there to you, get you the facts, and actually give you information that is helpful, that you can actually take action on. And you do not need any special materials to do so. So please check out our other videos. We also have a new channel that we started, which is 1 Meal a Day Modified. That is 1 Meal a Day Modified, because it goes through how I lost over 40 pounds and kept it off for a while. And in a while meaning many months, and I'm still always working on that journey, but what I'm doing actually works. There's more to it than simply eating one meal. That's why the word modified is there. So now, for the reason that you really came here, the buttons. So I'm going to start out just talking about buttons with holes. So this is a single hole button. I actually recovered this from a garment, and you can see that the single hole buttons, the buttonhole is always further over to one side so that the thread is sewn from the shortest side. Plus, it makes the button look better on the garment, and it also functions better when you're using it, when you're buttoning and unbuttoning. So it is rare to have single hole buttons, but there are some out there, so look for those. And this one, I'm not going to tell you what everything's made of, but that one's made of mother of pearl. This one, and this is like my favorite type of hole for a button to have. It's a self shank button and button hole. That's what this buttonhole is. It's self shank. And the self-shank simply means that this button is made of one material and the hole is put into that material. This is a Bakelite button, one of the chocolate ones. And the thing about this button is, look at, like, the hole is relatively small in regards to the button. That's one of the ways that you can also date buttons. The earlier buttons, like the Bakelite ones, had small holes like this. The newer ones, or the one, and not being new, but the ones that were made afterwards due to people complaining about how hard it was to sew these, have larger holes. So this is one of the older Bakelite chocolate buttons with a self-shank. And shanking was very popular because, I mean, and there's different types of shanks. Like, this is also a shanked button. This one, you can see the shank in it. But what you want to do to identify this is look at the shape of the shank. And this shank is, you know, part of the button itself. I don't think it's applied. Nope, it's not applied. But if you look at the top shape of it, you will see that it is like a slab. So this is actually called a slab shank. And these were, you know, the back like this was kind of popular, easy to make. You could use the same die that was cast for one button for another. Here's another self-shank Bakelite button, a red one. And you can see how this button is newer than the chocolate one because the hole is bigger. This is even bigger than what's on the chocolate one, and that button is like at least 3 times the size of this button. So it's pretty remarkable and cool shape to that one. This is a pretty button. I think it's all gorgeous. It is a huge rhinestone. This is a large purple rhinestone. I don't know, there you go. You can kind of see the color, the purple, but it's a beautiful purple rhinestone. I just had to show you that. But this entire system is unique because this is made so that they can put, they could put the rhinestone inside and crimp it around the edges. And it has what they call a flat shank on the back, and the reason it's called that is because it's flat. Flat shanks were generally made of metal because look at how thin they are. If they were made of any other material, these would be falling and popping off of clothing all the time or whatever it was on, and that would be really, really irritating. So this one is, you know, has a setting, and it's also a flat shank. So this is a button that, you know, was made for a more expensive piece of clothing, and I don't know, but this might actually be a garnet that's in this. So I have to like use a tweezer, so forgive me if it takes me a moment to get these in order for you. So I have a couple of these. So I'm going to show you 2 of them. It's simply that one is bigger than the other, but it's really bizarre because this is called a pin shank. And the reason it's called a pin shank is it sort of looks like a pin was stuck through the middle and twisted in the back to create the shank for the thread to go through. This button is, you know, probably the size of a quarter almost, and you can see what the shank looks like. And what's really strange is I have another one. This is about the size, probably smaller than a dime, and it's made of mother of pearl, but the shank is thicker. And I think it's thicker because it's made of a semi-precious material. And it's bigger. But these are pin shanks. So if you see that, these are so easy to identify. So the other thing, even though it's not really a shank, I'm going to show you are buttons that have holes. So when you have a button with holes, they're described as 1 hole, 2 hole, 3 hole, however many holes they have, that's how they're described. So it's simply the number of holes in the word hole. So this is a 4-hole button. The reason I'm showing you this one, because 4-hole buttons are, besides 2-hole buttons, 4-hole buttons are the second most popular button ever made. 2 holes are probably the most popular ever made. But this one is unique because it has 4 grommets in it. So this is a 4-hole grommet button. So if you have grommets through it, that is simply, I think, because first of all, it looks so much more expensive than if it was just 4 holes. And also the wear and tear in the clothing is probably easier because the buttonholes are relatively smooth. And also just for the, whoever the seamstress was, or if these were, you know, machine-made clothes, much easier to deal with. And you also don't have little tiny specks of plastic everywhere when you're, you know, having a machine poke holes, you know, poke thread through the holes of buttons all day long. 365 days a year in some countries. So, and these are, I just have, everyone knows what a 2-hole button looks like, but if I can pick these out, they're so slippery. These are like little jelly candies, but these are actually made of lucite. And I have a set of these. They're very thick, as you can see. And this is, you know, just another example of a button with holes. So this is a 2-hole button. So we have several of those on there. Move those out of the way. So when you have more expensive clothing, you also end up with, once again, more expensive buttons. So one of the more expensive ways to make a button is to make it with 2 features. And that's what this is. This is a, you can see, oh, you can see the back really well there. That's cool. This is what is termed as a, this one I am looking at my notes because I want to get the wording perfect. This is called a peg with needle grooves. So it's called a peg with needle groove back. And the reason why is a peg is considered to be this part, the part that is raised. And this is also, as you can see, it's made from one piece of material as these buttons were. So these are always going to be a button that has one piece. It's made from one material in total. And then it's with needle grooves because grooves are carved down into the button so that the needle can slide right through the grooves. So this is a peg with needle grooves button back. And, you know, for these large, fancy mother of pearl buttons, any other semi-precious button, that was, you know, really the best way to make those. So we have this button. I'm going to pick it up for you. There you go. It is a self-shank. This is a reverse painted button. It's had a repair, as you can see, to it. But this reverse painted button, its shank is a self-shank wedge. And the reason it's called a wedge is the shape of the self-shank. So shanks themselves, even the self-shanks, have descriptions to them as well. Now, if this, like this button is totally restored, it doesn't look that great. It's something I would put into a lot of buttons. But if this button was in amazing condition, meaning very good or higher, then what I would do is definitely describe the back of this button, because that makes a difference to button collectors. And the more work that goes into the back, just like the more work that goes into the front, the more value the button has. So identifying what type of shank is on the back is also important. So that was a self-shank wedge. Now this is going to be a sexy button back because it is called a hourglass shank back. And the reason why is it has a shape like an hourglass. And this one just happens to be built into the button, so that's how you would describe it, as an hourglass self-shank, because it's one piece. If it was applied, which I do have one here that is applied, this one is an hourglass applied shank, because this was glued or heat pressed into this button back. So some other types of, okay, let me show you this. So this is a button from about 1850, maybe even a little bit older. It's made of wool. The entire button is made of material. Even like they put this design, which I'm not supposed to be like trying to describe things, but they put this design on the front of the button. They piped a little bit of wire through it to keep the shape, and then they sewed that onto the wool. And this is silk. Then what they did, and these are called gathered back buttons, is they gathered the material in the back and sewed it so it would stay in place. And then when you put this on the garment, you simply lay it on top and you sew through the meatiest part underneath of the button. So these are called gathered back buttons. Here's another example that's made a little bit differently. This one, someone had amazing needlework skills. What a gift. And they probably also made laces and other expensive materials and textiles. This one has a chocolate brown satin underneath, and the brown threading this is all made by hand, just like the button I just showed you. You can see the fine work around the edges. And what they did is they gathered it in the back. So they would have pulled this around, and there's a piece of wood underneath. I don't know if you can see the wood. So they pull this whole thing over a piece of wood, and then they used a black thread to gather it. So this is a gathered thread back button. And I have another applied button I'm going to show you. I want to make sure I don't scratch this button though. This Zeppelin shape button, which is one of my absolute favorites. Oh, I love this button so much. It's huge. It's a large girthy button, as well as it's very long. It has this purplish color here, as well as olive green on the other side. And it has an applied shank on it, and you can see the shape of the shank here. And this one, I am going to look at my notes. This is called, okay, they're calling, wait a minute. Oh, there it is. It's a knob. So this is a knob shank. This is a knob applied shank button. It's applied because they literally had to press this into the Bakelite, and because of its shape, that's where it gets the word knob. So gorgeous button. This button has a lot of value to it, even though the Bakelite market isn't as hot, simply because it's two colors that are fused together. Very, very, very unique button, and very rare. And the shape is in the shape of a Zeppelin. Push these up. So this is very unique, and you will find this sometimes on your steel cut buttons, as this one is. This one has a applied needle back. So someone actually took and it's odd because it's made of brass, even though the rest of this button is made of steel. This button is made of several layers of steel. And I talked about this button in one of my previous videos. But what they did is they literally had to twist the wire, and you can see the soldering where they soldered it onto the back, which is where you get the word applied. So it's a needle back applied. It's a needle applied back. There you go. And oddly made of a totally different material than the actual button is. So this one, I'm going to show you. I know I'm picking out 4 buttons all at one time, and these buttons are heavy. Like, these could be little weapons. And look, they have little cartouches. I have to do more research on these, but I'm simply here to talk about the back of the button today. The back of this button is called a popper. And the reason it's called a popper, and that's P-O-P-P-E-R, popper, P-O-P-P-E-R, is because the shank, and it's a shank, so it's a shank button, so it's a popper shank back button, is because the shank actually pops up out of the button, sort of like playing peekaboo. So you have a well, and then the button, the shank pops up out of that. So these are called poppers. I have several buttons in various designs and shapes and colors that are like this, but this button, and I have another one, see if I can show you both at the same time. Ooh, we're getting fancy. I don't know if it's gonna work. Okay, not gonna work. I'll start with the small one. So I have this set of gingham buttons, and the back of these, as you can see, have like this recessed piece of material. And the reason that's there is so that you can feel it when you put it on the whatever material you're sewing into, and you can more easily and quickly apply the button to the garment or whatever it's going on, the textile. And this is made of cotton. So this piece that you see, the white piece right here, is cotton. The material is cotton as well. And it's on a metal back. So this little gray that you see is actually metal. And that's how you would apply these. So these are what I call cotton back, or sometimes my daughter and I nickname them puffer buttons, button backs. So we sometimes call them cotton puffer back, simply because it's like a puff and it's made of cotton. And like I said, how you apply these, much easier than applying this one, for example. This button is not as well made, even though it does have the maker's name on it. It's not as well made as the older button that I just showed you. This is a newer button. This one is probably like 1930s. The other one was probably, I would say, during the First World War, probably 1920s. This one is, you can see the little puffy cotton piece, like it's deflated. And that's simply because they didn't stuff it with anything. Whereas the other smaller ones are stuffed all the way through. And this one does, as you can see, have the name of the maker, as I stated before, on it. And the number 30 just probably talks about the size. So this is, once again, this one as well as the previous one, they're like examples of material-backed buttons. So this is a wire back, and this is an applied wire back, because as you can see, the wire is bent and it's stuck from the left to the right, and that's through the center is where your thread would go. So that's what that is, nothing special. This is a different type of wire back button. Color, don't like it that much. But, it's a good example of, you know, one that they took more time to make. They actually painted it, you know, all the way through the same color as the button itself. It's possible that this one was used in upholstery, like a pillow, or, and also look, it's magnetic. So if you lose, you know, when they're, and that's why I think this was used for upholstery. So you can imagine putting dozens and dozens of these on a pillow, possibly a couch or chair, whatever. And commonly people who make furniture, upholsters, actually have special tools, and some of them do have magnetic properties, so that, you know, when this is in a big pile, they can just stick their tool in there, pick it up. And that's why I think this was for upholstery. So, and even just the way it's made. But that was a different version of a pin, I'm sorry, a wire back. So the other thing with buttons, as I stated before, are, of course, how many holes do they have? So this is obviously a 2-hole button, but it's a recessed 2-hole button, because if you turn it sideways, you can see that there is an indentation where the holes are. So it's a recessed